Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson, and we are on to Week 14. This is the make or break week for most leagues heading into the playoffs. How you feeling, Goom?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm doing pretty well in our main league, and I'm in the playoffs, and so are you. So success from both of us. So we know what we're talking about. So that's good, at least to some degree. And it's also the make or break week for you potentially passing me, or at least you can't make the gap any smaller because you're only one correct game prediction behind me at this point. Blake has 117 correct, 78 incorrect, and I have 118 correct, 77 incorrect. So it's a close one.
It is, and I want to say not so fast on that make or break distinction because we've got four more weeks of football after this.
But it's make or break for me keeping my lead this week.
Not.
How about that? Because it's within range. Is my point? Is that it can happen this week?
I've been in striking distance all season long. I want to keep that in perspective. But yeah, like you said, one game apart in picks for the season. That's exciting. We're finally closing that gap. Let's talk about the teams that are going to be on bye this week. There are a lot of them. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we have the Bears, who are 3-10. I saw that they were mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. It seems like a lot of teams are
shocking with 10 losses
at the bottom. Yes, I know. But Saints also, they are 4-9. Colts 4-8-1. Packers 5-8. Falcons 5-8, and Commanders 7-5-1. So that was a tie last week. So did you just give neither of us a point, or both a point, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so I handled it the same way that whenever the Colts and the Texans tied, I gave us both an incorrect selection, meaning a loss. So the same thing for this week, and it actually couldn't have gone better. I misspeak when I say that. It could have gone better. We picked 4 games differently. I could have gone for 4 for 4. But one of those games was that tie. So instead of you picking up a win, we both got a loss. So I picked up 3 games on you.
Wow. Well, there you go. And we'll talk about the Buccaneers later on. But we officially have a team in that division that's at 500. So that's
let's go.
And I see 2 of those other teams right here are obviously below 500 and are on bye. But we can move on to Thursday Night Football, which is the Raiders at the Rams. So if the Raiders, they have identity. It's either Davante Adams or it's Josh Jacobs, or it's both, like it was in this one, which is really, this is kind of what you expected the ceiling of this offense to be. I think that's fair to say. And they did enough to beat the Chargers last week, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And we both picked the Chargers, probably. I don't remember.
Yeah, we did.
Josh Jacobs added his 6th 100-plus rushing yard game of the season and 10th rushing touchdown. I think he's making a statement to say, hey, I deserve to be a starter. If not on this team, some team I deserve to be a starter for, because as we've talked about early in the season, that, what is it called, Hall of Fame game, whatever it was in the preseason. Yeah. Really weird narrative going into the season for Josh Jacobs, but he's cementing himself as being arguably an elite NFL running back, and that is... It's really, I mean, he's always been looked at as decent, but he's really cementing himself this season, I would say.
Agreed.
And then someone who's already cemented himself, of course, is Davante Adams, who had his season high in receiving yards at 177, while also having 2 receiving touchdowns. And something I just want to note, because I don't feel like we talk about him too much, Derek Carr has 9 games with at least 2 passing TDs, making him a fine bye-week fill-in. People were probably hoping for a higher ceiling with the addition of Davante Adams, but Carr's still throwing a decent amount of touchdowns, more than he kind of was last season. Was it kind of a meme where he wouldn't throw more than 1? I think that's what it was.
No, it was the same problem. He wouldn't throw more than 2. Okay. So he stayed consistent. He is who we thought he was. But he's been doing it with a much reduced, obviously outside of Davante Adams, a much reduced quality of cast of characters around him. Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller being on IR for the past few weeks has created a bit of a challenge. And, Mac Hollins has had games, but he's certainly not someone you can count on. It's really Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs, like you said.
Yeah, Mac Hollins has kind of stayed involved, but not enough to really be fantasy relevant to make your starting lineup. But he's remained involved, so it wasn't just one game that he went off and then just completely disappeared. So it's been a little interesting. But Jacobs is elite for fantasy, Adams is elite for fantasy, and Carr, I would say, is a fine bye-week fill-in. So with the Rams, fun offense I love talking about. They got a new addition, though, and I'll talk about him soon. But Matthew Stafford will most likely miss the remainder of the season with a spinal cord injury. Sean McVay has clarified that this won't be a long-term issue for Stafford. That's their coach, but I feel like most people know that. If I know that, most people probably know that. I'm not that good of coaches, but there you go. Backup quarterback John Wolford only threw for 178 passing yards and 2 interceptions, and this was a mediocre performance or bad performance enough for them to pick up Baker Mayfield off the waivers because the Panthers released him. So I would say that you probably would have agreed with Wolford being there. You're not starting a Rams pass catcher, but does that change with Mayfield?
No, how can you say it does?
I know. I get it.
We've watched Baker Mayfield play. I mean, if anything, it speaks to how desperate the Rams are. They've been historically terrible coming off of their Super Bowl win. I think the addition of Baker Mayfield is a very ho-hum piece of news for fantasy purposes. So, nothing really moves the needle in that regard.
I don't exactly understand why they acquire him. I mean, I don't think they have much of a chance, if any, of making the playoffs. They obviously are still going to go with Stafford next season, is with, them kind of McVay clarifying it's not a long-term issue. I feel like that kind of shows his cards in that regard a little bit. Not that I think that Mayfield is the direct replacement, but it seems a little, it's just out of desperation, but I don't feel like they should have any hope this season, so why?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Obviously not an NFL GM by any means, but I think with Matthew Stafford suffering a spinal cord contusion, that's a very serious injury and something that he may not be healthy for. And of course I'm speculating, not a doctor either. On my list of things that I am not, NFL GM and doctor are both on that list, but I think that Matthew Stafford is going through a serious injury right now, and it's possible that, I don't know. I mean, they probably just want to save face. They don't have their own draft picks. They do need to win, just for the sake of they're not getting next year's draft pick, no matter how bad they do this year. So I think, honestly, they're just incentivized to win based on that. Yeah,
it's interesting for sure. I know that they have to take the $1.3 million or something from that the Panthers are supposed to pay Mayfield, so they're having to pay him extra on top of what they're probably now going to give him as a 1-year contract, or I don't even know what the details of that are. But
they just absorbed that money that he was owed for the season.
Got it. So basically just transfers over. All right, well, we can move on from the quarterback talk and talk about Cam Akers. This is actually some positive news, maybe, with the Rams offense. Akers had his season high in snap percentage at 72%, while having 17 carries and 2 rushing touchdowns, while also having 1 reception. From what I remember, he wasn't super efficient with yards per carry, but he got 2 rushing touchdowns. So with the season high in snap percentage, what do you make of this?
Yeah, 3.5 yards per carry. That's by no means elite, but it's okay. I don't know. Honestly, I don't want any part to. I don't want to do anything with this offense.
Yes, totally.
Cam Akers finding the end zone twice is nice, but the last time he scored was week 3 of this season, and it just doesn't feel like something that you can really count on. I would say he's a flex consideration, and I'm kind of waiting to see if Kyren Williams gets more involved, because there was a lot of hype around him during the preseason before he was injured, and now that he's quote-unquote healthy, he's not getting a whole lot of usage. So it's hard to say, but I'm going to join you on picking the Raiders in this one. I think the addition of Baker Mayfield honestly doesn't help the Rams at all. So going with the Raiders on this one.
All right, let's move on to Jets at Bills, and kind of I know it's in Buffalo, but disrespectful for a 9.5 spread within the Bills' favor. They beat them in New Jersey when they faced them the first time. I know it's in Buffalo, but don't you think that's a little disrespectful?
I've been saying all season long that the Jets are frauds. So
they only lost to the Vikings by 5. I don't know. I'll talk about their offense, and
I'll pick them.
I don't know about that, but I will say with these Week 13 stats for the Jets, and I'm pulling this straight off of PFF. No plagiarism here. It's worth noting the Jets ran a ridiculously high 85 plays in a non-overtime game that inflated the numbers of all offensive players. They've run 61 plays or less in half of their games. So that is something to note for some of these stats. But Mike White, who I saw pretty sure has already been announced to be the starter in Week 14, kind of regressed a little bit in some areas. He threw 0 passing touchdowns and 2 interceptions in Week 13, but he did throw 369 passing yards with 31 completions on 57 attempts. So that's kind of the passing yards and completion attempts. It's looking like early season Joe Flacco, which was great for the receivers. And this makes Garrett Wilson, which is spelled incorrectly, arguably a wide receiver 1. I mean, I don't know. He has that ceiling, it seems, with back-to-back 20-plus fantasy points with White as the starter. That distinction doesn't really matter because he's making your starting lineup no matter what, but it is interesting to see how well he does with anyone other than his brother, Zach Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver 1 might be a little ambitious considering the teams that are on a bye this week. But I think safe wide receiver 2, someone that I was targeting in drafts for sure. But, and, you know, the return of Zach Wilson kind of plummeted his stock for a short period. But, yeah, I would totally agree. I think that Mike White kind of did a good impression of Mac Jones, what he did on Thanksgiving. Put up a lot of yards, not a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah.
And I just want to give a shout out to one of the commenters from last week's video, Matthew Smith. He said, as a Jets fan, we call Mike White Mike F. White. So,
wow. Look at that.
Just
we were chanting it for last week. That's good to hear. That's funny.
Yeah, so that's cool. And let's keep talking about some of the other kind of rising stars that we're seeing on the team.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a long history of not liking Corey Davis, so calling him a rising star kind of hurts me a little bit. At least if we're talking about pass catchers. Maybe you're alluding to Zonovan Knight, but I'll talk about him later. But
yeah, Bam Knight's more on my mind.
Yeah, the next best Jets pass catcher was Corey Davis with 5 receptions for 85 yards on 10 targets, but I personally wouldn't be looking to start him. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and then now we'll talk about a potential rising star in Zonovan Knight. And he was once again the lead back in Michael Carter's absence. Keep an eye on Michael Carter's injury status because I feel like him returning makes Knight not worth starting, and I don't really know what it does to Carter because Knight hasn't been involved since Carter's been out with an injury, so it'll be interesting to see. But Knight in Week 13 had 15 carries for 90 yards and 5 receptions for 28 yards. Running back Ty Johnson had 6 receptions, but Knight is definitely the Jets' RB to start in Carter's absence, but it may make it difficult to start any of them against the Bills this week. Do you think that's fair? Tough matchup.
I would avoid starting pretty much everyone outside of Garrett Wilson this week that wears a Jets uniform, but I think that it's kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about it here in a moment, but I think it's very interesting that Zonovan Knight didn't get any opportunities prior to the team acquiring James Robinson.
That's true.
He's literally been inactive for the first half of the season, so as far as I know, he wasn't injured, but it just seems like negligence to not look at your own backfield before acquiring a player that you're not even willing to use.
Yeah, James Robinson looks as good as Zonovan Knight early season. Is what his current.
Dang.
Yeah, I mean he's like not
That's
playing.
What he did there.
Yeah, they switched, but no, your point is exactly right. And James Robinson, I guess, is droppable because of that. It's weird. It's almost hard to do so because you're like, well, why did they acquire him? But there's nothing pointing in the direction other than the fact that they did acquire him that they really care about using him.
Yeah, you want to hear something really interesting? All the way back in Week 8, in my ESPN league, I made a possibly season-saving trade, and that was trading Deontay Johnson and James Robinson for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tony Pollard. How's that feeling?
I do remember that. That is amazing.
That is amazing. That's talk about buyer's remorse for the other guy.
Yeah, for sure. I feel bad for that other guy. That is difficult. To move on to the Bills, we have another emerging running back. Rookie James Cook had 14 carries for 64 yards and 6 receptions for 41 yards on a season high of 43% of snaps. Devin Singletary, meanwhile, had 13 carries for 51 yards and a rushing touchdown, but 0 receptions on a season low of 44% of snaps. So it's not like Cook, he's still barely outsnapped Cook, but it's a season high for Cook of snaps, whereas it's a season low for Singletary. So do you expect Cook to completely take over this backfield, whatever that may look like?
Yeah, so I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit on what you're meaning by that. Are you saying like a 70-30 split, or Singletary becomes unusable? Like, what are you thinking?
I feel like Singletary is becoming unusable. I mean, like he completely, him getting a rushing touchdown is the only reason he hit double digits, and he barely did so. And I think that Cook getting 6 receptions and 14 carries, and season high for him, season low for Singletary. I wouldn't be looking to start Cook this week, but I think it's trending in the direction that Cook really could be their starting running back next season. So
okay, so even though
this season is kind of unknown.
Yeah, even though they had similar snap percentage usage, James Cook got more touches, which is what you're alluding to. Yeah. I think it's an interesting consideration. I don't know if I really necessarily trust either running back right now. If I roster James Cook, he probably feels like the more preferred option at this point. But I'm not super familiar with his goal line usage. I think, and I'm going to try to look that up while we pick this game.
Yeah, but I know that I'd be surprised if Singletary's their go-to guy because he's like 5'7", so I don't even know who they use in goal line situations. Josh Allen, every time.
Yeah, but he's still been getting rushing touchdowns. So
yeah, I just mean like I don't think he has a strong hold on that role. Is kind of my point necessarily. While you look that up, we'll just talk about the pass catchers because it's kind of how it's been this season. Gabe Davis, 2 receptions and a touchdown on 81% of snaps, while Isaiah McKenzie had 5 receptions for 44 yards on 52% of snaps. I would almost say you would start Allen and Diggs, and then you're kind of risky anywhere else because you have the wide receiver in Gabe Davis is more involved snap-wise, but needs a touchdown to have a good week, and then McKenzie's getting receptions, but still isn't nearly as involved snap-wise as Davis, and then we've already talked about how it could be risky to pick Cook or Singletary this week, so like you tried to tempt me earlier, even though the spread's big, and I think that's a little unfair, I will pick the Bills. And
all right, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm going to join you on that. I really feel like when the Jets won against the Bills, it was fluke, and I just can't pick against the Bills in this one.
Yeah. Did you find anything you were looking for, or should we just
No, I couldn't. NFL Savant was being a bit idiotic and wouldn't let me connect, so we'll have to, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll move on to Browns at Bengals, another divisional matchup. With the Browns, Deshaun Watson made his return against his former team, the Texans, last week, and went 12 for 22 for 131 passing yards and an interception. Something that's positive, 21 rushing yards and 7 carries. That's pretty good. We know that he can do that. So I feel like it's an easy yes because he set the bar so low, but do you expect him to improve upon this performance against the Bengals? I guess that's what makes it a little bit difficult. Because theoretically a much stronger defense than the
You're
Texans.
Asking about how I feel about Deshaun Watson this week?
Yes, improving upon whatever it was, a 5-point-something fantasy performance.
I mean, it can't go much lower.
I agree.
I think that the fact that he couldn't get it done against the Houston Texans is a very bad look.
Yeah, I mean, they still won the game.
Yeah, but it was all on the defense. If you had Cleveland's defense last week, you probably won your matchup.
Okay, that's fair.
They put up like 30 points in fantasy, so it was a bit lopsided in terms of who did what for the team in order for them to win. I really think if Deshaun Watson is your main quarterback, and I'm speaking directly to you because you have Lamar Jackson who's hurt. Yes. I don't feel comfortable. I honestly probably feel more comfortable playing Tyler Huntley than Deshaun Watson this week. So
that thought has already crossed my mind. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. It really scares me that the worst team in the NFL by record kind of bottled up Deshaun Watson. That's bad. And I don't expect the Super Bowl runner-ups to give him an easy time. So that's kind of where I'm looking.
Yeah, I guess you could hope for a shootout to make Watson's day better. And hey, maybe there was something psychological about him facing the Texans. I don't know. Who knows? But he got the win last week, as you said, thanks to the defense, so that he had an opportunity to still win the game and kind of maybe brush off some rust potentially, but we'll see how quickly he can get that all off. Let's talk about the targets for the pass catchers. Amari Cooper led the team with 9 targets, but this didn't amount to too much. Donovan Peoples-Jones had 3 targets, so that's not what you like to see, but again, Watson didn't throw the ball a ton. And then David Njoku was inactive, so it'll be interesting to see how much involved he is when he returns.
Yeah, they expect him to play this coming week, so That's good news for Njoku managers.
Yes. Nick Chubb rushed for 80 yards, which is where all of his fantasy points came from. He had 8, so that can happen with him. Doesn't get his touchdowns. It happens. Moving on to the Bengals, Ja'Marr Chase made his return and had 7 receptions for 97 yards. Had a Ja'Marr Chase day. A receiving touchdown salvage. T. Higgins 3 reception days, so that's not really what you'd want to see from him, but I would still say you feel pretty good going forward. It's not like he's completely irrelevant when Chase is there. That's usually reserved for Tyler Boyd. I think he even had more receptions than Higgins this week, but I would venture to say that like it's kind of an anomaly for that to happen for Higgins. That's not normal for him to have 3 receptions.
Yeah, you're right about that. Boyd did have 4 to Higgins 3. But the real number that concerns me is T. Higgins 5 targets when, obviously with no Ja'Marr Chase, he's been getting close to double digits every week.
Yeah.
5 is a bit of an unexpected drop against Kansas City.
Yeah, and a close one with the Chiefs too, and fairly high scoring. It is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Yet again, in Joe Mixon's absence, Samaje Perine I don't even know. Put some respect on his name. Obviously, I'm not. He did very well. He rushed for 106 yards on 21 carries and had 6 receptions for 49 yards. So that's great. He's obviously fits that Alexander Madison elite handcuff Tony Pollard. I guess he's in that conversation now.
I don't know if I would go that far.
Back-to-back games with 20-plus points, I'm pretty sure.
I know. I think... I'm not convinced, but I like the player.
Yeah.
I just think that, it might be putting the cart before the horse to call him like an Alexander Madison.
Okay. Not unfair, but I would say that if you're looking to start him and Mixon's out, I would say that's not a bad play.
No, it's an excellent matchup. Cleveland's been really bad against defending running backs, and although I have a sense that Joe Mixon's going to clear concussion protocol this week, we've just seen with the new changes to that protocol that coming back one week following the designation is difficult.
Yeah. Joe Burrow also had a season high of carries with 11, finding the end zone with one of those. So obviously 32 carries between Perine and Burrow shows that they obviously found more success on the ground than passing, because Ja'Marr Chase got his, but really no other pass catcher got theirs. But yeah, I'm going to agree with you. Coming off of a win against the Chiefs at home, Cincinnati Bengals should win against the Browns.
Yeah, and this is a weird one back on Halloween night when the Browns kind of just shut down Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that that's not going to be the case home with the Bengals.
I agree. And moving on, I'm holding in laughter because I see the biggest spread all season: Texans at Cowboys. Cowboys 17-point favorite. We'll talk about that scoreline against the Colts. We could do it now or when we get to the Colts, but let me just talk about the Texans first. Mm-hmm. Kyle Allen, yet again, threw 1 passing touchdown and 2 interceptions, same thing he did in Week 12, while throwing for 201 yards on 20 completions. This production and volume limits the ceiling of Texans pass catchers. Brandon Cooks was inactive, so note that. And Nico Collins led the team in targets of 10, but he only had 3 receptions. Fortunately for him, one of those was a receiving touchdown. You know how I feel about targets. Collins is averaging 9 targets across his past 4 games. Does this make him worth rostering? Because I believe his roster percentage is still pretty low. I'll check what it is exactly.
Rostering is a completely different conversation from playing.
Yes.
And from that perspective, I will agree with you. I mean, I've been saying it for weeks now that Nico Collins is someone who should be rostered in more leagues. But the real problem is how can you justify playing a Texans player that isn't Dameon Pierce? It's a scary place for fantasy, and with no Brandon Cooks.
I was just gonna say I probably like Nico Collins a lot more next season than the rest of this season. This is only his second season.
If Houston drafts a quarterback or something happens with Davis Mills where he gets superpowers and starts playing better, then that might be something to look at.
I really can't imagine Cooks is on that roster next season, and if Collins can just take the old Cooks role, it almost doesn't even require an upgrade at quarterback. I mean, although Cooks at the beginning of the season wasn't great, but Collins was still involved more than he was last season. But obviously it's been worse. Mm-hmm. But getting a new quarterback would be great too, but I just think that he could still fill that role with Cooks.
Oh, and I do want to just pat myself on the back really quickly. I called it. Jordan Akins did have a better week than Foster Moreau. It wasn't by much, but it was true.
Wow. There you go. Yeah, that's probably low stakes because
5.1. 5.1 is what Akins put up.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What a call.
That was a good one.
Yeah. All right. Dameon Pierce. Basically, like you said already, he's the only Texans player who's confidently starting. He kind of was in a rut a little bit. He had back-to-back games with 8 rushing yards each.
And by the way, lower expectations against Dallas because
that is true.
There's no chance that they're going to be competitive in this game. I don't want to be disrespectful. I know they're just hitting their stride, but we watched the Colts get absolutely bludgeoned by Dallas last week. It's not going to be any better for Houston. I can't imagine.
What I'll say though, do you think Pierce is still flex worthy because of the fact that he was back to having 20 plus touches?
Yeah, I think you probably, especially with 6 teams on a bye, you probably don't have a safer option. It's just the game script is going to be really brutal for Pierce, I feel.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. You can hope that he can get quite a few receptions just to keep that floor high enough to not.
Yeah, maybe he stumbles into the end zone once.
That's true. Could happen. So, if the Cowboys, the major favorites. Mr. Efficiency, he's back to being Mr. Efficiency, Tony Pollard. 91 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns on 12 carries and 2 receptions for 15 yards. But Ezekiel Elliott is also playing well. 77 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown on 17 carries and 3 receptions for 14 yards. The Cowboys did score 54 NFL points against the Colts in Week 13, but I think that kind of for the first time you can somewhat confidently start both of these running backs.
Yeah, it's an excellent matchup. Texans are worst in the NFL against defending the run.
Yeah.
And there are 2 very talented running backs. We're starting to see Zeke look like his old self a little bit. And Tony Pollard is electric as ever. So, yeah, both of those are definite starters.
Something I want to note wasn't it like a 2 or 3 point game against the Colts near the end of the third quarter? And then, boom, 54 to 19.
Yeah, it was like a 3-point game going into halftime, I want to say, and then they just pulled away.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Actually, I want to see. Yeah, no, they scored 33 points in the fourth quarter.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, that is pretty good. So if they can keep that up, that's amazing. That's on pace to score well over 100 points if they did that each quarter. Not likely. But
yeah, they'll win the bowl if they keep doing that.
Yeah, just do that. Run it back, fellas. Michael Gallup had 2 receiving touchdowns on 4 receptions. Oh, Gabe Davis, which makes him a little unpredictable. But I think he could be a good play in the fantasy playoffs as he continues to get more involved in the offense. I have something here about Odell Beckham Jr. potentially derailing that, but it seems like with new reports, Odell will not be ready to play super soon. So I would feel pretty confident in Gallup kind of taking over that wide receiver 2 role, which could be pretty valuable in this high-scoring offense.
Yeah, mid-January is kind of like the earliest timetable for him, so I don't really think it's going to affect anything fantasy-related.
You saying I drop
Gallup,
him for you so you can pick him up?
Right. Yeah, Michael Gallup's a player that I think is worth looking at. I will tell you his roster percentage at 67, so in about a third of leagues he's available. Make sure to keep an eye out on that.
Yeah, there's a chance that you can find him. Dalton Schultz had 2 receptions for 33 yards in Week 13. That's not good, but 2 receiving touchdowns on 4 receptions was enough to make him the tight end 1 in Week 12, so it's hard not to start him because he has proven to have that ceiling, but that is, and it's such a high-scoring affair to have 2 receptions for Schultz. I bet he'd be an annoying player to roster this season with this kind of production mixed in with good production, mixed in with injuries. But he has shown what he can do, so it's hard to
just chalk it up to him being a tight end and just move on.
Yep. You know how much we love tight ends. We're both picking the Cowboys. I won't go against you on this one. All right.
Shocking.
Move on to Vikings at the favorited by spread Lions, who will be
2-point home favorites.
They are.
In the division matchup.
Yep. So with the Vikings, as you said, this is always pretty simple analysis. In a close win over the Jets in Week 13, Kirk Cousins only threw for 173 yards and 1 passing touchdown. Justin Jefferson caught that sole passing touchdown and had a decent day overall. He had like 18 points, but that is below his average, so I'm not going to say it was amazing. But that's just how high his standard is. Yeah, this lack of passing volume left every other Vikings pass catcher pretty quiet. TJ Hawkinson is the tight end 3, so you can't really bench him if you have him. But Adam Thielen might only be given one more chance by fantasy managers against the Lions defense because he's just really taken a hit in negative touchdown regression. So how do you feel about that kind of ultimatum for him?
Yeah, I think so. Let me look at their upcoming schedule because it may not be entirely fair to give up on him here. I mean, Indianapolis is going to be a tough draw in Week 15. The Giants are kind of so-so, and then Green Bay in Week 17 is also kind of so-so. So I wouldn't say it's the last chance for Adam Thielen, but I think it's a good opportunity for him to bounce back after how he performed last week.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I kind of mean it as the last chance is like him always making your lineup, which I don't even know if that is the case for people that have him. It might not be. I'm not necessarily saying that you should drop him, but this is definitely
he's wide receiver 31. Wide receiver 31 on the season, so he's a flex level player.
Yeah, that's fair. And then Dalvin Cook had a solid day, having 22 touches and finding the end zone. So yeah, pretty simple analysis. Move on to the Lions. We've had a few changes in this offense. So DeAndre Swift looked like his old self, rushing for 62 yards and a touchdown on 14 carries, while also having 4 receptions for 49 yards on 6 targets. 51% of snaps still isn't amazing, but I would now be pretty confident in starting Swift after this performance because he's looking like he's getting the usage as if he is fully healthy, and it seems like that is the case. So do you agree with that? You feel pretty confident in Swift now?
Yeah, this is obviously a very positive development for managers of DeAndre Swift. He was getting peanuts, and now he's getting a whole meal. So,
yeah,
this is an improvement for sure.
And I just want to highlight the fact that Amon-Ra St. Brown is currently the wide receiver 6 on the season, which is not really, if you've been seeing how he's doing, that's not surprising, but I just mean to say that he boomed so early in the season, you kind of forget where his ADP was, and wide receiver 6 is just so insanely good compared to his ADP. I mean, you were getting him as your wide receiver 3 probably.
In Sleeper, he was right next to Brandon Cooks, so if that gives you any perspective.
Yeah, they were always back-to-back, and I feel like I was taking Cooks a lot more than St. Brown and mock drafts. So
in fairness, we thought that Cooks was going to be a safe top 20 wide receiver, and he has not been that at all.
And St. Brown was going to be the riskier play, and St. Brown's really shown his ceiling for sure.
Yeah.
Another piece of news for this offense is Jameson Williams making his debut in Week 13. He played. I mean, making his debut is kind of light because he played 8 11% of snaps. Yeah, and having 0 receptions on 1 target, but he was active, and I dropped him a few weeks ago. You now have him, so I bet you're hoping for some more going forward. But what do you expect from him going forward?
I'm not to brag, but I am in a position where I don't have to start him. I'm really just holding on to him to see what he becomes. He could be someone that in Week 16 or 17 he's established himself as a fringe wide receiver 1, and that would be fantastic. But I think that if you roster Jameson Williams, you likely are in a good position in your league, and you don't have to throw him out there in your starting lineup. So just keep that in mind. Let him prove it before he burns you.
Yeah. Jared Goff, I'll say, threw for 340 passing yards in Week 13, so there could be enough to go around for both St. Brown, Williams, and little dish-off plays to Swift where he gets all those little PPR goodie points.
It seems like everyone's putting up yards through the air against Minnesota, so this should be a big game for all the pass catchers. And by the way, revenge game for TJ Hawkinson. We didn't mention that before.
That is true. I'm going with the underdog, the Vikings.
Yeah, I'm going to join you on this one. I think that maybe if Jameson Williams was healthier, that there might be a conversation here. But Minnesota has twice as many wins as Detroit, so let's keep that in perspective.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we'll move on to Eagles at Giants divisional matchup. So in Week 13, Jalen Hurts had a monster day, throwing for 380 yards and 3 touchdowns while also having 1 rushing touchdown. I mean, people in Week 3, analysts, which we know that analysts can sometimes be clowns, but in Week 3 we're saying Hurts MVP discussion. That was way too early. Now he's looking like that to me.
Hey, I saw somebody saying Cooper Rush for MVP at that time.
Yeah, that was stupid. But Hurts is getting to
there
that
have been
level.
worse takes.
If that is true. If Lamar Jackson didn't have his MVP season so recently, I think there would be more to say about Hurts being this one of a kind we've never seen before player that can throw for this much and also rush for over 100 yards like he did last week. Yeah. Just Lamar Jackson in recent history kind of established himself as that first one of a kind. But it's seeming like there's more and more quarterbacks that are fitting that mold, and that is very exciting to watch.
Just wait until Justin Fields fits that mold.
Yeah. I think it's a great development for the sport. I think it adds so much to offenses, and it just adds a lot of nuance to what teams can do. And I think that's, like I've said in multiple weeks, that's what makes the Eagles so good, is Hurts can do this with a monster passing day, and then he can also just, like, lead the league in rushing yards for the week. Like, it's ridiculous. It really is. So it kind of goes without saying, but A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both had great days because of Hurts' performance. Brown caught 2 touchdowns, and Smith caught the third. When Hurts has a day like this, though, it takes a touchdown from Miles Sanders to have double-digit fantasy points. That did happen, but it only amounted to Sanders having 11.8 fantasy points. It's a little annoying probably to roster Sanders, but he's proven to have too high of a ceiling, I think, to really bench. It just can be difficult to know whenever he's going to be that guy that carries your lineup, or just kind of like, nah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's always a flex consideration.
Yeah. All right, so that's all the Eagles. And Goddard is still out, so there's not really much to talk about outside of Brown and Smith as the pass catchers. Move on to the Giants. I was happy to see that Saquon Barkley returned to having a top 10 RB performance for the week. That made me happy. Wide receiver, Isaiah Hodgins. I always have to add what position it is when I've never seen the name before. He caught Daniel Jones' only passing touchdown, but I'm more convinced by Darius Slayton's performance, which includes 6 receptions for 90 yards on 8 targets while playing 92% of snaps. And, we've always been searching for that Giants pass catcher. Do we finally have a flex-worthy one in Darius Slayton?
I do like Darius Slayton as a player. I think this is a tough matchup for him this week.
Yeah.
But if you're desperate and there are 6 teams on bye, I think you can do worse at flex than starting Darius Slayton.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Our guy, Daniel Bellinger. I feel like as much as we hate on tight ends, we like to find these like hidden gems that maybe could be reliable for you. And Daniel Bellinger's kind of been that guy, or was starting to be that guy until he got injured. But he made his return. He played 97% of snaps, which is great, and that amounted to 5 receptions for 24 yards on 5 targets. So did not get you double digits, but he's getting the receptions that you like to see in a tight end. The bar's low, as we always say.
Yeah, he's rostered in 6% of leagues on Sleeper. And we're like applauding for 7.5 fantasy points. But it's I don't know. To throw a dart at him. Why not?
I mean, he should be rostered in more than 6%. There's way more tight ends.
That's probably fair. It's
I mean, you're talking about an offense that is, it is mainly Saquon, but it is a pretty good offense that needs to find a pass catcher. You would think that could be reliable, and it could be Slayton. It could also be Bellinger. I'm not saying I'm really excited about putting in my starting lineup, but 6% of rosters is really low.
Very few tight ends reach that caliber. So
yeah,
it's just something that we continue to focus on in these episodes.
Yes. What did the Giants do last week? Oh, they're the ones that tied with the Commanders. Yeah. I mean, we're both picking the Eagles, but I don't think the Giants will be a pushover.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This is a divisional matchup. Anything could happen. The Eagles' only other loss came to the Commanders, so that's important to keep in perspective. But I just think that the Eagles are a better team, so I'm going with them.
If you weren't so close to me in game predictions, maybe I would go to the Giants, but I don't feel confident enough to do that.
Throw it away.
Right.
Go ahead.
We'll move on to Ravens at Steelers, another divisional matchup. We split up the notes here, so I have the Ravens. Lamar Jackson, sad to see, is my starting quarterback, as we've already mentioned. He's considered week to week with a knee injury. But, as we both know, Tyler Huntley has shown glimpses of being a Lamar Jackson clone when he's been called up to be the starter. So do you think he should be prioritized on the waiver wire? Or should I start him over to Sean Watson? That's basically what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I already kind of tipped my hand in that regard.
You did.
I do think he's probably a safer option this week than Deshaun. And yeah, Tyler Huntley, we've seen him. I mean, I almost think part of the reason that Baltimore didn't re-sign Lamar is because they have Tyler Huntley right behind him.
Yeah. Which might be disrespectful to Lamar, but
no. Well, what I'm getting at is that Tyler Huntley's not an MVP level player, but he is a damn good backup quarterback.
He is,
and I think that he fits perfectly in their scheme. In that, similar to what you're saying in a Lamar Jackson clone. But yeah, Tyler Huntley is a good backup quarterback. He could likely start on several rosters and be better than their current starting option. Looking at you, LA, and the Rams, not the Chargers.
Yeah.
I realized I had to make that distinction.
Yeah,
but
funny.
no, I think that's important to note. And also, let's talk about Mark Andrews, who, in that time that Lamar missed last season, Mark Andrews got a significant bump in production. So let's talk about that.
He did do very well. I didn't pull any sort of averages, but I do remember having some elite performances with Tyler Huntley. So
I believe I read it was like 4 points per game higher.
Wow, and on a pretty high standard already with Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
So you hope that he can replicate that with Huntley, and that his ceiling won't be limited too much. I will say, with Tyler Huntley, it's not like every game he filled in for Lamar last season was amazing, but he had one game where he absolutely boomed with like 2 rushing touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns. I mean, there are quarterbacks, and like you're saying, it's unique that they have someone that can fit the mold of Lamar Jackson in the offense, because there are quarterbacks that don't hit that 2 rushing, 2 passing touchdown metric in a game in their entire career, just because that's not the type of player they are. So Tyler Huntley already comes in and does that. Shows that he has the ability to kind of be the guy who could do everything like Lamar can.
Yeah, I'm looking back at last season's numbers for him, and Week 15 against Green Bay, he had a 2 passing touchdown, 2 rushing touchdown game that absolutely boomed for him. Yeah. So Green Bay was no slouch last season. They were a playoff team, and Pittsburgh is not that this year. It's a divisional matchup, so who knows? But it could happen.
Yeah, so I think that Huntley is a very solid fantasy replacement if you have Lamar, or if you just need a bye week fill-in. And Mark Andrews, as you said, could potentially be even better. And really nobody else worth starting in this offense. So I'll let you take over for lengthy notes on the Steelers.
Hey, I mean, it's the same thing I talked about.
Unfair.
Yeah, it's the same thing I talked about a while ago. They're kind of all flex considerations. Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, all flex options. And then Pat Freiermuth is a tight end 1, so you're likely starting him. And that's kind of it. This team is 2.5-point favorites. You're going to the Ravens.
I am.
And I'm thinking about it. I think...
Is Tyler Huntley better than Kenny Pickett?
I don't even know if it comes down to that. I think it's just more that I don't know. I just something gives me the feeling that I want to pick the Steelers in this one, so I'm going to go with them.
It's a weird one. It's a weird one for sure.
Yeah.
All right. You can take over with the rest of your notes.
All right, let's talk Jaguars at the Titans next. Trevor Lawrence struggled at Detroit last week, only completing 17 of his 31 attempts for 179 yards and a touchdown. I feel like we've seen that 179 number quite a bit. Despite this, Lawrence should remain a borderline QB1 option with 6 teams on bye. Not really worried about him in this one. Tennessee is a good defense, but it just feels like lately the Jaguars have needed to pass the ball, and I think they're going to call on Lawrence to do that more.
Yeah.
Travis Etienne scored just 7.6 fantasy points and has disappointed fantasy managers since Week 10 after a 3-game stretch of weekly finishes as a RB1. I know you're feeling that hurt. Etienne still remains a must-start, but this may not be the week we see him finish inside the top 10 again. Tennessee ranks 8th against running back, so it's a tough draw here.
Christian Kirk.
There's the copium. Christian Kirk is a lineup lock, and while Zay Jones was targeted 7 times last week, he appears to be more of a boom-bust flex option than someone you can rely on a weekly basis.
I'm excited for this team next season with Calvin Ridley. I'm remembering that right. He went to the Jaguars.
Yes, he did.
I think that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, if he can stay on the field and get his off the field issues under control, this could be a legit team coming out of their division. Sure. Let's talk about the Titans next, one of your all-time favorite teams.
Yep, all-time.
They were dominated by Philadelphia, and all players suffered for it in fantasy. Derrick Henry remains a lineup lock despite this, and it's a good matchup for running backs against the Jaguars. We've seen it all year long. Bit of a scary moment here for Treylon Burks. He did suffer a concussion in a brutal helmet-to-helmet hit on his lone catch. I think it was worth ejecting the defender.
I did not see it.
That didn't happen. So, yeah, it was a bad hit. It was a bittersweet moment. It was his first career receiving touchdown, but he did leave the game afterwards and was ruled out shortly after. Monitor his status. He had been developing into a usable pass catcher on this team prior to this injury, so keep an eye on that.
I am going to pick the Jaguars. The Titans are going 0-17 this season in my books.
Yeah.
No, don't take over.
I'm gonna take Tennessee in this one.
No.
That's what I'm doing.
Fine.
All right. Next game, Chiefs at the Broncos.
Woohoo!
This is a disrespectful spread. 9 points for Kansas City. Are you kidding me?
I know. It should be 9 for the Broncos.
Yeah. So, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce appear to be the last remaining lineup locks on KC, which is hard to believe. We were seeing Juju Smith-Schuster kind of pop off. He had a 3-game stretch where he was a weekly wide receiver 1, but he has since struggled in a scoring slump, less than 7 fantasy points per game for 3 straight weeks now. That's bad. He is a flex at your own risk. I wouldn't do it. Personally, Denver ranks 2nd against wide receivers. That's pretty much the only thing they have going for him. And moving on to the running backs, Isaiah Pacheco seems like the preferred running back to roster, but he still remains touchdown dependent. 3 consecutive weekly finishes as a RB2. Denver is more middle of the pack against running backs. They rank 12th in the NFL. So, yeah, Pacheco's a flex option at running back for sure.
With this good of an offense, it really is surprising that it is just Mahomes and Kelce. I mean, is Mahomes the QB1? He might be. I know that Kelce is probably the tight end one. It's funny. Either way, they're both very high up in their position rankings, and then they leave nothing Mahomes, for anyone else.
Mahomes QB1, Kelce tight end 1, and Kelce put up 7.6 last week. He was nothing special.
Yeah, but the standard. We know the standard.
Very much so.
And of him.
Yes.
So
not to get too much into it again. So let's move on to Denver. They are 9-point underdogs, which is absurd. They scored 9 points last week, so I guess Kansas City's only going to put up 18. But last week in a game that resulted in 19 total points scored, like I said before, their defense is the only thing worth anything on that team. I'm looking at you, Russell Wilson. We didn't learn anything we didn't already know about Denver last week. They might be the worst team in the NFL right now, and I really don't see how you can argue that. I know that the Texans have 1 win.
They beat the Texans.
But Denver is awful.
They are very, very, very bad. I saw that the Cowboys scored 54, as we already said, in Week 13, and that's more than the Broncos have scored since Halloween. I think that was the stat.
Yeah, maybe they can watch some film on that team and pick up some stuff.
Maybe.
I'm gonna kind of give you a quick rundown of these players, and I want you to just quickly answer flex or bench. So Latavius Murray, he put up 10.1 last week.
Oh God. Bench.
Okay. Cortland Sutton with a hamstring issue, considered day-to-day. He had 0 fantasy points last week, 1 target, played 43% of snaps.
I mean, you obviously have to see if he has some full practices, I feel like you could flex him, but if he's limited but still gets cleared, I would probably lean towards thinking that Judy, the next person you ask, will be the one that you'd want to start. So I need some health out of Sutton to have any sort of confidence at all.
Okay, so we'll say, wait and see on the wide receiver situation. You're willing to start one of them if one of them is unable to play.
If one of them is inactive, I'm definitely feel pretty... Oh, that definitely still strong.
I definitely feel pretty.
Yeah, I definitely feel pretty. And then that's a side note. And then Judy probably is a good flex option.
Okay, and then Greg Dulcich, 14.5 fantasy points. He was the tight end 2 in week 13 and the tight end 40 in week 12. So very volatile there.
I don't really buy it. God, this is a great offense. So I guess, Judy, you feel fine about, especially if Sutton's out.
Mm-hmm.
Flip a coin on which one you want if they're both healthy. Dulcich is too volatile, as you said. Volatile, yes. And then Latavius Murray, I think, is just... I feel like his ceiling is like 10 points. So...
Well, if he falls in the end zone, that certainly bumps him up. But a low floor play for sure.
Yeah. Ugh.
I'm picking the Chiefs. Where are you picking?
The Broncos. No.
Let's do it.
Chiefs.
Come on.
Chiefs. This would be awesome if they won, though.
Jeez, gross. All right, let's talk about Panthers at Seahawks next. Coming off their bye, Carolina did announce they have waived Baker Mayfield. He's already found a new home, as we've mentioned. So it's going to be Sam Darnold as the starter and P.J. Walker serving as backup moving forward. Deontay Foreman handled 24 carries back in Week 12 and warrants flex consideration, albeit touchdown dependent. And DJ Moore had a 3-game stretch of scoring less than 7 fantasy points per game before finishing as the wide receiver 12 in Week 12 against Denver. So that's kind of a good sign. Yeah. Is Moore worth a flex consideration this week, or is he too risky against Seattle, who ranks 7th against wide receivers?
I think he can be a flex consideration. We saw when Darnold actually looked good at the very beginning of last season. DJ Moore was having an amazing start to the season. So It's not like he's never done it with Darnold, and I think that's enough to make him, a flex consideration.
Okay.
He's another player that has been probably really annoying to manage all season, because there was a stretch there where in the middle of the season where it's like, oh, okay, he's finding a stride. Kind of like the Texans against the Eagles on Thursday Night Football a few weeks ago.
Exactly.
And it seems to have had a similar outcome to that team, because he has not really found a stride other than, like you said, that Week 12 performance against Denver, which is surprising because Denver is the one thing they're good at, and he had a decent game. So they're good at nothing.
Fair enough. So let's move on to Seattle on this one. Geno Smith performed tremendously against a historically terrible defending Super Bowl champion Rams team that is missing the majority of their key players, including Aaron Donald on defense last week. Monitor him. Well, I guess this is not relevant because they play Thursday night. So what I meant to say was... Despite them missing players, especially key players on defense, Geno Smith looked amazing. And both pass catchers, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, looked amazing. They are lineup locks, and I guess we can take the L on our preseason ranks for these guys. They were just too good for their situation. And it also helps quite a bit that Geno Smith just kind of became really good at football.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely take that L. But also, even more importantly, the Seahawks can really take a W in a trade that everyone thought was going to make the Broncos a much better team than the Seahawks. I mean, the Seahawks are they're not as good as what everyone hoped the Broncos would be, but the Broncos are probably worse than anyone thought the Seahawks would go down to. They really swapped.
Yeah, that might be fair. Yeah, that might be fair, yeah. Moving on to the running back situation, Ken Walker has an inflammation issue with his foot that will need to be managed in practice this week. Monitor his status. Don't trust what you hear from Pete Carroll.
Yeah, don't
shout out to Chris Carson last season.
Yeah.
You are picking the Seahawks. I will join you on that one. I like this team. They're really coming on, especially on the defensive secondary portion, and I think that's going to give Carolina some trouble.
Agreed.
All right, let's talk next about Tampa Bay and the San Francisco 49ers. And the first note, Tom Brady still knows how to win games. He may be old. He may be he's past going through a divorce.
I think he got the win. 2-1. Sorry, it's 2-1 since he's gotten divorced or something. 3-1 maybe.
Hey, get that toxic energy out of here, man. It's probably helping him in more ways than you know. But shout out to his daughter. happy birthday on Monday. And
what? How do you know that?
They talked about it on the broadcast. I'm not that involved.
Right.
But anyway, he got that win. It was a good time all around. Let's talk about the fantasy players now. Running back committee was nearly a 50-50 split, although Fournette looked like the better running back in terms of efficiency, which hasn't always been the case this season. Rachaad White lost a fumble in the fourth quarter but redeemed himself by scoring the game-winning touchdown with 3 seconds left on the clock. It doesn't get any clutcher than that. Chris Godwin remains a must-start, catching 8 of his 13 targets for 63 yards. I would have loved that game-winning touchdown to go to him. It could have helped me a lot in my matchup last week. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case. Tampa Bay still got the win. They don't care about my fantasy team. Mike Evans continues his struggles, making him more of a boom-bust flex option, which who would have thought, especially with no Marshawn Lattimore in this game, who would have thought that Mike Evans would be a boom-bust flex?
I mean, he clearly, I think in a lot of people's rankings, clearly was a wide receiver 1. So it's been a disappointing season for him. And it's good to see that one pass catcher, and Chris Godwin has become consistent to almost the ceiling. Not the ceiling, but almost the level that you would expect from him on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, we can certainly call Chris Godwin a good value in drafts this year,
yes.
If nothing else. And then Cade Otton finished Week 13 as the tight end 1, rookie tight end, in case you haven't heard a lot from him this year. He caught 6 of 10 targets for 28 yards and a touchdown. Cameron Brate was inactive due to illness this past game. We know Tom loves getting the tight end involved, but Otton remains a boom-bust option and has been less reliable when Brate is healthy. 6 teams on a bye, I get it. You might be desperate, but at least monitor Cameron Brate's availability in this one, because if he's not there, maybe Cade Otton's worth starting. He was literally tight end 1 last week, but it was really all...
On
it was
14.8 points?
Yeah, yes.
Yippee.
Yeah. So
but
let's go ahead and move on.
I will say before you move on to the 49ers,
okay.
Unless Fournette leaves, this has to do with next season and drafts. Unless Fournette leaves, this is not going to be a very fun backfield to draft out of.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And it's a situation that we talked about last week that I traded to get out of.
Yeah.
Or I guess 2 weeks ago. But either way, it's kind of complicated with it being a 50-50 split as it is currently.
Yeah.
All right, so on to the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo was given a 7 to 8 week return timeline, making him potentially eligible to return deep in the playoffs, but for fantasy purposes, his season is over. But man of the hour, Mr. Irrelevant, which is last draft pick in this most recent 2022 draft.
Brock he's a rookie? I didn't realize he was a rookie. Okay, wow.
Yeah,
I saw the Mr. Relevant, but I didn't realize he was a rookie.
So he will fill in as the new starting quarterback. San Francisco continues to fight through significant injuries this season, especially at the quarterback position. We're looking at you, Trey Lance, hoping he gets healthy for next year. But this is the first time a Mr. Irrelevant threw a forward pass in regular season in NFL history, let alone throw for touchdowns.
Wow, usually they're so, irrelevant that they throw it backwards.
Yeah, good one.
Towards the wrong end zone.
Yeah, they're so confused. They're like, I'm playing?
Yeah.
Anyway, Christian McCaffrey was the lone fantasy stud on San Francisco in Week 13, 28.6 fantasy points. You'll have to see that, looking like his old self. Deebo Samuel was my wide receiver 4 in preseason rankings, so clearly I was a little too high on the talented young player, but he is still a wide receiver 2. I think the addition of Christian McCaffrey has hurt him in ways that you could have speculated at the time of the trade, but no one knew for sure. But it is clearly appearing that way. Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle both struggled as well. I chalk it up to the early QB change more than anything. I still like both of those players season long. And I'll ask you, with Brock Purdy under center, how does the QB change affect your rankings for these players rest of season?
I know we're at a stage in the season where you can't really do a wait and see this week, and I think that the ceiling of all these players is too high to do that with them. But as far as how I feel rest of season, it will kind of depend on how this week goes, but they still are all too good to not be in your starting lineup.
So. Yeah, that's how I feel as well. Glad we're on the same page there.
Yes.
All right, who are you picking in this one?
I just find it hard to believe that Tom Brady could lose to a Mr. Irrelevant. No offense, Brock Purdy.
No, I like that. I think so. So Brock Purdy was, I think he was 5 months old when Tom Brady made his start in the NFL. Just to give you some context of old versus young here, I'm gonna join you.
Wow.
I'm gonna. Well, I don't ever like to pick against Tom, so lifelong Patriots fan and Tom Brady fan, of course. But I think with San Francisco, I'd be fine being wrong about this one, but I think that they can certainly get it done. Experience over expectations, we'll say.
Yeah, I mean, the defense for the 49ers is still very good, but I think Brady can get it done.
Yeah, he finds a way, man. He finds a way.
He does.
All right, let's talk about Sunday Night Football next, and this should be a good one. Miami Dolphins at LA Chargers. For Miami, both running backs were major disappointments in their revenge game at San Francisco last week, combining for 3.3 fantasy points. That is a big oof. What's that?
I said I traded out of that, which I can't believe
for a short period that was the wrong move.
It was, but I mean Devontae Smith had a good week last week. That makes me feel good about it. He's someone I acquired out of that trade. Pickens did not, but we will grace over that. But something that is interesting is, like I've mentioned in a previous episode, I was like centimeters from pressing the button to get dropped Jeff Wilson most likely for Deontay Foreman, and it's almost turned out to not be a bad move to not do that, although Deontay Foreman has been very good. Just an interesting little tidbit from me.
Yeah, a little bit of reminiscing.
Yes.
All right, so I do expect a significant bounce back in Week 14. The Chargers rank among the league worst against running backs. I don't have their exact ranking, but I know they've been bad this year. Sorry. Between Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert, who do you rank higher?
See, this is why I traded them away. I guess Wilson.
I think it is Wilson, too. I think it is. We've seen, since he's been acquired by Miami, we've seen him be used more as the primary running back and Raheem Mostert more as the change of pace guy. So I agree with that. I think Jeff Wilson's the preferred option. But I honestly think both options could be at least flex considerations in this matchup.
Yeah.
Moving on to pass catchers, Jalen Waddle only played 52% of the snaps while playing through a leg injury. Monitor his status. He said that he's going to be good to go for this game. And I tend to believe him. So Tyreek Hill is a lineup lock, as is Waddle if healthy. Moving on to the Chargers, Austin Eckler largely underwhelmed in a favorable matchup against the Raiders. 13.2 fantasy points. He is still a lineup lock. He is still the RB1 on the season. So don't get too cute in this final week heading into playoffs. I don't know why you would. But anyway, Keenan Allen finally looked like the wide receiver you were hoping for on draft day. Hopefully he keeps it up for any team still fighting for a playoff spot. Joshua Palmer and DeAndre Carter have been volatile flex options over the past 5 weeks. They are both flex at your own risk, in my opinion. Do we have any updates? I haven't seen anything about Mike Williams. He has a projection for the week, so that's a good sign. He should take part in practice this week. And that's kind of it. So monitor his status. I suppose if Mike Williams is active, that Joshua Palmer and DeAndre Carter kind of fall out of that flex consideration. Would you agree?
Yeah, I wouldn't be looking to start either of them. And it's disappointing that this is for people that have Mike Williams. It seems like this could end up being a game time decision situation, which is really difficult for Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, that's sketchy for sure. Maybe you can replace him with a Monday night guy
yeah.
Well, we'll talk about those soon. Gerald Everett is the last one I want to talk about. He had his first tight end 1 weekly finish since week 7. That was the week prior to their bye week. He's tight end 9 on the season, so are you willing to trust him this week with 6 teams on bye?
Sure. I feel like he has a high enough floor to be better than a lot of other tight ends that you might need to be. Well, if you're having to replace someone because there are a lot of teams on bye, I think that he is definitely not the worst option to have, because it's a possibility that you have him on your bench because his ADP was very low, and you've just been stashing him all season. That's not impossible. So I think in that instance he would be pretty good fill-in.
Yeah, and I mean, considering he's a top 10 option at the position for the whole season, that's kind of indicative that he's likely been rostered for a while. Yep. But yeah, I think we keep falling back into the trap of talking about tight ends. We need to just kind of banish them
because
from the
that
show
position
for a while.
is like we kind of talk a lot about the fringe guys as far as making your lineup, and that kind of is the definition of a tight end. So it's difficult.
Tight end - fringe guy.
Yeah, I've seen it. I can already see it listed on next to their name and sleeper. I can see it.
Check your local encyclopedias.
Yes, do it.
All right,
I think this will be a close one.
Oh, yeah, let's pick the game.
Make your pick. I picked Dolphins.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Miami as well.
I think their defense is better than the Raiders, and if the Chargers couldn't get it done there, I think the Dolphins can bounce back from a loss against the 49ers. It being in Los Angeles definitely helps the Chargers, but I think the Dolphins have a good chance of winning this.
Yeah, and maybe with the addition of Mike Williams, they have that extra bump. But even then, I still think it's hard to surpass the duo of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, which I mean, if there's a reality where Mike Williams is active and Waddle's out, that could change it. But we don't know that right now.
Maybe so. Yeah, we're recording this on Tuesday evening, so you'll just have to wait and see, like the rest of us. Yep. All right, let's talk about Monday Night Football, the last matchup of the week. Patriots at Cardinals, and I'm going to be pretty brief about New England. They are the 1.5 point favorites in this game, which I find a little comical.
They keep on doing it to the Cardinals.
New England struggled severely on Thursday Night Football against Buffalo, leaving Ramondre Stevenson as the lone lineup lock for this roster. Jacoby Myers now has 3 consecutive games with weekly finishes of wide receiver 45 or worse. He needs to be left on benches until he returns to early season form. This is not the week that I'm looking to put him in if I need to win to make the playoffs, so keep that in mind. Moving on to the Cardinals.
Wait, before you move on, who would have ever picked the Patriots to beat the Bills last week? That was probably a rogue person, whoever did that.
Yeah, maybe I don't know.
You'll probably fan, right?
You'll probably have to tune into our last week's episode to see who picked that.
Yeah, maybe it was the Patriots fan. That would make sense.
Well, maybe the Patriots fan has some sense. So let's move on to the Cardinals here. Coming off their bye, lineup locks include Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and Marquise Brown, all solid options. I would say lower expectations for James Conner. I say it all the time. New England is still one of the best defenses at limiting running backs. And then when it comes to a third wide receiver in this team, monitor Rondale Moore's availability. We've yet to see a fully healthy receiving core of Hopkins, Brown, and Moore. If Moore is cleared to play, how do you rank him for this week?
Yeah. I think he makes your lineup. I think he's the flex. He's shown... It'll be interesting to see what happens with Hopkins, Brown, and Moore, as you've said, all being on the field at once. But
yeah,
I think that he could get it done still. I think that this offense has been very unlucky with the star power, honestly, that they do have. But it's been... When Brown was going off, you had Hopkins suspended. And then Moore also wasn't there to start the season. And... that's a really, really good trio, and I think that people are going to be sleeping on the Cardinals, and they think that they could bounce back to having a season like they did last season, next season. I think they could.
Yeah, and so then we talked about Mike Williams being a game-time decision. I think this is the guy to look to if it ends up that Mike Williams doesn't play, and that's Greg Dortch. He is 6% rostered, and as of this recording... And if Rondale Moore can't play, which, by the way, let's get Moore's roster percentage really quick.
Let's get more
it's
about
65.
Moore.
65. So 10 times the roster percentage. But Rondale Moore did not.
Low. Can you believe that? Sorry, I am dumbfounded that he is that low after having like 3 straight weeks of.
So I was gonna explain why he was so low. It's because he didn't play in week 12. People aren't gonna carry him through the week 13 bye. So if Rondale Moore is unavailable, I think Greg Dortch is a similarly ranked player as Moore. We've seen him really perform well in Moore's absence. And so if you're absolutely down to the wire, that's a lot to bank on. But if we have information heading into the weekend about Rondale Moore's availability, scoop up Greg Dortch and have him at least as a backup for Mike Williams or any other late slate players.
That's a smart play, but we also haven't seen Dortch with Hopkins and Brown out, but I still think that is a smart play, though.
No, yeah, I think so, too.
Good thinking.
So you're picking the Cardinals.
I've convinced myself after looking at their offensive star power. And they're getting a long break coming off a bye and then playing on Monday. I mean, Patriots coming from Thursday, but still.
Yeah. I'm going to join you on that one as well. I think New England is
really good.
Gosh, I'm just looking at their record now. Arizona's 4-8 and New England is 6-6. That's kind of wild. I'm still going to pick the Cardinals with you. I think just for the sake of we've already picked 2 games differently.
Oh, you. Wow.
Listen. It's been a strategy all season long of mine since I've been playing catch up to pick my battles wisely, and so
it would be fitting for all season for me to have a small lead. So then I have the disadvantage of basically always picking first, basically, and then at the very last second you overtake me.
Yes, right at the last moment I edge to the front. Yeah. So yeah, that's the strategy. Those are the perks of being the big brother and making the rules at times. So hope you all enjoyed listening and or watching. We appreciate you so very much, and good luck. Make the playoffs. Make that push. Anything you want to add?
I'm doing something weird with my hands. Peace out, everybody.
Okay, we'll censor that. All right.
Not that weird.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next week.